Hello and welcome back to videos. So this is a video about epidemiology, and that is the study of the spread of disease or the study of disease patterns. Epidemiology is not necessarily always about infectious diseases. There are epidemics of injuries, epidemics of violence, lots of other things that they could study in epidemiology, but of course what we are interested in is infectious disease. So let's look at the factors that control the spread of infectious disease. So here they are. There is the causative agent or etiology. There are the characteristics of the people who are getting sick, the way it is spread, and how it gets into a person. So etiology could be whatever causes a disease, and in this case it's the microbe, and we use Koch's postulates to verify the etiology. And so that could be a very virulent pathogen or a weak pathogen. It could be one of the strains of cholera that can only infect you if you eat 10 to the 10th cells, or the one that can get you if you eat 10 to the 6th. That's 10,000 times less. So etiology can make a big impact. Demographics, as you can imagine, are huge because they can affect someone's health and resistance to disease, having to do with sex of the patient and age. Very young babies, very old people, for example, tend to be overrepresented among people who get infectious diseases. And here are some important words that will come up again: incidence and prevalence. Incidence is how many people get a disease per time. So incidence would be like how many HIV infections were there in 2006. And prevalent or incidence is what I looked at when I was reading the LA Times, which had the most amazing graph at the beginning of COVID. It had a logarithmic scale. It was a semi-log graph, and it was lots of colors, and it was amazing. But what they were showing was how many new cases of COVID there were every day. That is incidence. Whether it's every day or every week or every month or every year, as long as it's cases per time, that's incidence. Prevalence is how many total people have the disease at this time. And so that, with a disease like COVID, that tends to be over in a few weeks, prevalence numbers aren't super different from incidence numbers. But for disease that could be chronic, like human papillomavirus, the infection by human papillomavirus, the prevalence might be much higher than the incidence. And we see that with a lot of the sexually transmitted infections. And here are some words to describe how often we see a disease, where we get epidemic, pandemic, endemic. Those are all important to know. And there are always new diseases appearing, and that's an unfortunate thing, but we can expect more diseases because of climate change and because of the growing human population. As more of us live in, near borders of wild lands, lots of new diseases will appear. Okay, so I guess one of the things that I most want to talk to you about is the modes of transmission, because this is the one that that we have to talk about when we talk about diseases. So we'll look at modes of transmission, and I'll show you when we get to the important things. Remember, look at the words that are underlined. So I'm going to skip through a little bit. A word I want you to know is the prodromal period, or the prodrome. That's when a person knows they're getting sick, but they don't have distinct enough signs and symptoms to tell them what is making them sick. So when you start to get a sore throat or start to feel like achy before you know you have influenza or COVID, that's the prodrome. And before that is the incubation period, when you have no signs and symptoms at all. There are other words you might be curious about, but again, they're not underlined. Reservoir is an important word because this is a source of the infectious agent. So a reservoir is where we find the pathogen, and it could be people who it grows in them, or it could be animals, or it could be anything else. So vectors, that's an important word because that's animals that just transmit disease from one organism to another. So a lot of times mosquitoes or the feet of a fly. The fly doesn't really care whether you get disease or not, but it wants to land on fecal material and on your food. And so it's going to bring fecal material to your food and you're going to get a disease. That's an example of a vector. And mosquitoes are well known as the most deadly animal in the world because they're so effective at spreading diseases from person to person. That's mosquitoes. They're a vector. And then there are non-living reservoirs for things like Clostridia that live in soil. The endospores will be in soil. So that's just it. You get that from soil. Another important word, is fomite. A fomite is something like a doorknob or a table, something that can become contaminated and can spread disease that way. And so that's why you have to be so careful in a clinic to clean surfaces that patients will touch, especially if your patients have infectious diseases. This is one of the biggest things I want you to understand. Respiratory droplets. When a person sneezes or coughs or talks, they release respiratory droplets. And this picture is fantastic. This is a picture of someone sneezing. And what it shows is this blue cloud and then this shower of different things. Well, these are big respiratory droplets that just fall because of gravity. And these are the microscopic respiratory droplets that do not fall. They stay in the air for hours, and they're too small to see an individual one. And so these are what we call droplets. A disease spread by droplets, you're going to get it from touching a surface. And that's the original SARS-CoV-2 virus, the original strain back in early 2020, was spread mostly by droplets. And so people were wiping down surfaces to prevent the spread of that. Omicron was not spread that way. Omicron was airborne. Sorry, I lost my train of thought, but basically this blue cloud is a cloud of microscopic droplets. So they're all droplets. And this gives us a really weird and obnoxious terminology where we talk about droplet spread versus airborne spread. We say droplet spread when we're talking about these large droplets. And airborne or aerosols are these smaller particles. And the difference really is an airborne disease must be spread by these particles because they stay in the air and they're so small you can inhale them all the way into your lungs. Whereas these big droplets would never get into your lungs. Let's see what else. That's what it said. Humidity affects droplet size. So if you live in the interior of the country or on the East Coast, in the winter it's very dry, and in the summer it's very humid. In the winter, little droplets in the air will evaporate and get smaller and smaller, and they'll stay in the air longer and longer. Whereas in the summer, they will start to collect extra water and they'll get bigger and bigger and they'll fall. So that's one reason why infectious diseases or airborne diseases spread a little bit better in the winter in those places. So the last part of this video is about the portals of entry and exit. It's pretty straightforward, so I'll skip through it. And that's it for the required slides. So everything else here is for your curiosity. Again, the words to memorize are the slide titles, the underlined words in any word on a slide that says terminology. So there you go. I've noticed a thing in YouTube videos these days where people talk about one thing and they just show random video while they're talking. Is it working?